So today I'm here to talk to Professor Marjolein Lips-Wiersma, whose research led to the creation of the map of meaning, work that I've been involved with for many years, and so have many other people. So welcome, Marjolein, it's wonderful to have you here. What was the original inspiration for that research? Because that's a pretty distinctive topic to take, and as you said, people didn't encourage you at one level, particularly in terms of career. So what made you choose it and then choose to go with it?
Yeah, so people were, as I said, incredibly encouraging in terms of their interest. You could immediately see that that was a topic that was alive in people's hearts. And I remember even people from other parts of the university, like those who were in science and so on, sending me little notes or little quotes or things like that. So it was very much alive in people's hearts. It was just at that time, it wasn't a popular topic to talk about, and nor was it an academic topic at the time. That became such an interesting question of, this is so alive in people, and yet we don't actually seem to speak about it. But then if somebody identifies publicly with it, sort of, almost like comes out of the closet and says, well, this is what I'm interested in, and becomes almost a speaking point, that so many people were so eager to engage with it. And so that was really, that kept me going in that first year where I didn't really have a clue what I was doing, and absolutely, I was completely lost, kind of trying to define spirituality and trying to find research and learning still actually about what is good research and how do you do research in a way that is aligned with my values.
So what research process did you use finally?
Right, well that in itself then was, because then what do you do? So by that stage I started to read more, not just about workplace spirituality, which was very sort of idealistic and conceptual in that beginning time, but more on the meaningful work research, and of course also read about Viktor Frankl and his experiences in the concentration camps, where he said, and he talked about the well-being of people who found meaning there. But he also said, and that was quite striking, that he said, well, if you ask people what is the meaning of life, everybody's just stunned basically and goes, well, I don't know. But if you ask people, where did you experience meaning today or yesterday or in the last year even, then people, when they can relate it to their own experiences, are able to ask that question, and moreover should be given the opportunity to answer that question. And so at that point I started to look at, well, what are then some principles by which I want to do research? And so one of them was that I thought it should ideally help those that I do research on tell their story in a way that helps them. And then the second one was the whole issue of, do you do research on people or do you do research with people? And the whole thing, particularly with spirituality and later with meaningfulness, that none of us is an authority on it. So there was no, I couldn't claim that I was going to speak as an academic authority to a person who was just going to be my subject and give me a little bit of knowledge that I would then somehow organize into something academically coherent. It was much more having to be a mutual learning and sharing experience. And so that became a big second part of it. And then third part of it, so that was more about how we were working together with the data, I think. And then another part of it was that so many people, when I started talking about, well, whom am I going to interview, that people were, that a lot of assumptions were coming up of, well, this is only going to be relevant to, say, professionals. Or, well, you can never have a big enough sample because it will be so different from, say, a Buddhist from America than it will be for, say, a Mormon person from Fiji, something like that. So if you really want to do research, and you have to talk to hundreds of people to sort of get some pattern in this, and people said it's different for craft people who, can create something than it will be with somebody in a supermarket who just follows orders. And so that also became then part of the challenge of where I went, well, it's exploratory research, maybe I should just talk to all of those people then, and then have people from different cultural backgrounds, different religious background, people who said, well, I have something spiritual, but I have no idea what it is. So then I started sampling on that, and you know, that I think became a big strength of the research. And so yes, we did have the oyster farmer in the Kaipara harbour, and you know, talking about railing against the wind and getting these boats to work, and you know, and then we did have somebody who was sort of part of a larger corporation who just had decided that he was having a fish tank, and he had named all these fish in there because that was a way that they can all actually talk about each other, and you know, and so you had these very diverse experiences, but they were all stories about people expressing, you know, their meaning and their spirituality and their work, and they all had similar themes. So, and then the last thing that I quite consciously did was that, so we analysed the stories together, and so I wrote them up, and then I would send them to people, and a few days later I would then interview them again, and we would say, well, what is this about, what is that about, what is that about, you know, what was the meaning in here, or where did the meaning get lost here? And so we analysed these stories together, and then I wrote up all the data, and then I invited all of them together, because they were by that stage also quite curious to meet each other. And so I invited all of them together, and I said, well, this is sort of what I found, and then some of them said, yeah, that's about right, but there's still a bit missing, and you know, and so they expanded the findings again through their input and their own reading and increased understanding of their own stories through the process, and yeah, all of that became a PhD. And there was one more thing that was really interesting in terms of data, was I wanted to know whether what people talked about in a week of meaning or a month of meaning or a career time of meaning, whether that was similar to what they were experiencing on a day-to-day basis. So I also asked everybody to keep a diary for me, and most of them did, and some of them said, well, that, you know, I'll never have time for that, or that's just not me, but ring me up a couple of times during, you know, and just ask me what I'm doing right now, sort of. So that's the other thing. And so I compared whether the themes in their day-to-day life, like is meaning just a thing that you create over a lifetime as more a large abstract meta-narrative of your life, or is it also something that you shape and create on a day-to-day basis? And are those themes of the meta-narrative different from the day-to-day narrative, or are they the same? And so that was also really interesting and important information. So those were the pieces of data and how they were structured and created.
What did you think you had? You know, so what was the end of it for you in the sense of the PhD?
Well, I just thought I had a nice picture that had was visually representing the data, and so that, as far as I was concerned, was the end of it. And also, I think, like most people who do a PhD, at that point you really don't want to ever see the thing again.
So what happened?
Yeah, that became, how shall we put it? I think the work wanted to jump off the page, and so I then felt enough responsibility to it, given that I had created it. I mean, half of me kind of went, oh well, don't do that, it's just research, you know, don't actually start using it in real lives. And the other half of me went, well, if that is inevitable and people are doing that anyway, then I do have a responsibility towards it, so then I better see what people are actually doing with it, and maybe also speak to it, not just in an academic way, because that also became clear as I started giving some papers at conferences and things, that people wanted more than just me talking about my findings, and again that they engaged with it not just as academically interesting, but also personally interesting. And yeah, and I remember even at academic conferences, people who were like OD practitioners and career practitioners saying, oh, we should do a workshop with this at the next conference, you know, and so there was all of that going on. And then I ended up living in a local village where somebody was organizing a conference on workplace spirituality, and so I presented there, and then I started working together. Basically, people like yourself primarily said, well, we need to bring this into the world, and started showing a huge commitment to that. Because I think if at that point that commitment hadn't been there, also because of my type of personality, I think I would have still quite happily left that to somebody and just jumped on to the next thing. I do like jumping on to the next thing. And but because I saw that huge commitment there, I think I felt I had to just stay with it. And so that was basically it. So then what happened after that, I think we started to run some workshops. Again, I felt that maybe I wasn't the right person to run those, but I did enjoy seeing people using it and learning from that and looking at what they were actually doing, what it was doing, and also what it wasn't doing, where it was helping people, where how it could help people better. And I think that was then also the start of so many people communicating, I don't like the word spirituality, but everything that is in your work also resonates with me. And so then we had to do another piece of having conversations with people and talking around, well, if we don't use spirituality, what do we then use? And we came to the word of inspiration. And so as it started to be used, it also started to evolve, or my understanding of it started to evolve, where I went, wow, because the research participants, they brought in the doing and the being part of the map, and the self and the other part of the map. And that was so interesting because, because they were research participants and I had been committed to this co-collaboration process, I just kind of went, oh, well, I'll go along with it, put an arrow here, put an arrow there, do a bit of this, do a bit of that, but fundamentally changing the shape of the model. So I felt I'd been graceful about that. But it was only when we started really using it that I could see how people were talking often in meaning, in terms of tensions between, that they really wanted to achieve something, but that, for instance, they also felt that their whole lives had become about striving, and hence that became meaningful because it was always about the next step, and that they therefore needed to balance the striving or the doing with being. Or they would say, well, I've lost my meaning in doing too much for others and not enough for myself, or I've lost meaning in just sitting by myself and navel gazing and being really deep about life, but actually, just not contributing to anybody anymore. And so that was just so interesting that as people started to, I heard more the conversations more in general about how people were meet, that it also, because people were using it, it gave me much more of an understanding of what in fact had been created.